Welcome to Issues, and we're so very happy to have you join us. As you know, Issues is a program that looks at what is taking place in the community. We focus on some of the movers and shakers. Today we have with us Dr. Andrea Lightbourne-Webster. Did I get it correct?
Yes, you did.
She has started a foundation. In fact, this is the second time we've had Dr. Lightbourne-Webster with us. The first time she came, she introduced her foundation and what it will be doing in the community. And we'll just review some of those things and see what's been happening. Dr. Lightbourne-Webster, welcome to Issues.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Now, even though you told us the first time, tell us, what is the focus of your foundation?
Well, the Lighthouse Ministry Foundation aims to reach out to people in the community who may be have a need or hurting in some capacity. It could be from a myriad of circumstances. What I've found is that the needs will change depending on what we're doing at the time. For example, this time we are looking at reaching out to those who have suffered the loss of a loved one. Mm-hmm. In the fall, at the launch, was getting to know your sense of purpose. So there isn't a carte blanche approach every time, but basically it's reaching out to the needs of people in the community. Okay.
Now, you mentioned that you're focusing on people who have lost loved ones. What motivated you to focus on this at this particular time?
Well, this has been on my mind for quite some time. I recall in January 2013, there were actually 2 murders, and there was a cycle of gang violence that was going on. And I was basically very sensitized to hear mothers on the radio and on the television appealing for an end to the gun violence. And basically, you're dealing with the residue of a hurting family and who've suffered the loss of loved ones. And so my concern was, what could I do to assist in the process?
And the outgrowth of that is the workshop that you're having.
Yes.
Now, as you look at mothers, you said you were listening to the radio and heard the hurting voices.
Yes.
of the mothers. And, if we look at the news, we see in the States gun violence in schools, mm-hmm. Gun violence taking place all around. And people are hurting.
Yes.
And many times they're hurting because of the loss of a loved one. Yes. Now, in your own opinion and in your own experience, when someone loses a loved one through death, as a result of death, mm-hmm. is it the same type of, do you think it's the same type of hurt as compared to someone who may have lost someone from an illness?
Well, death is no respecter of persons,
yes.
And therefore all of the emotions associated with the loss of a loved one, I believe, are there. And obviously the circumstances of the loss will have a great impact on how the respondent responds. For example, if there's someone who's lost a life tragically, you're with them 1 minute and the next minute there's a tragic loss, the mind doesn't have time to process all of that immediately. And so it takes probably a little longer to deal with the issue of shock. That's a trauma.
Yes.
And so I would say that the circumstances have a great impact on the respondents of loss. But certainly we all feel pain. Yeah. We all know what it is to cry. We all know what it is to hurt. And so there's some similarities, of course, in the process.
Mm-hmm. As we take a look at young people who may have been lost through gang violence, and I know that's not our focus, but it says it takes a village. It takes a village to raise a child.
Yes.
Do you find that to be true?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that particularly because families today are not the typical nuclear family that was more the norm, mm-hmm. Mother, father, children, picket fence, house, yes. Everything in order, yes. If you will. So many of our children are coming through environments where there may be a breakdown in the family structure. So therefore, any support that can be given to these young people, and even the parents themselves, mm-hmm. will be helpful to help them function in our world today.
Mm-hmm. Now, at your upcoming workshop, when you speak about loss, sometimes young people, teenagers, they may have lost a granny that they were close to, or heaven forbid, a parent.
Right.
Now, as a teenager, would they find help, guidance, and direction at your upcoming workshop?
Oh, absolutely. There's no restriction on age. It's open to anyone who is in a position of just needing an arm of support. And it doesn't even matter whether the loss was yesterday or 20 years ago. I have an uncle who lost his wife many years ago, 53 years ago.
Wow.
And we had a conversation just recently because I lost my first cousin. And we shared some things that somewhat surprised me, because one would have thought, with the loss being so many years,
53 years,
perhaps the state of being may be slightly different. And what I found is that loss is loss, memories are memories, and therefore sometimes people need an opportunity to just grieve.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting that the workshop is going to be all about moping and sadness. I don't want you to get that impression. But think about it. The person dies, the phone rings off the hook, the flowers are coming, announcements are read on the radio, it's in the newspaper, you have the service, the funeral's over, you have the wake, and then it stops. Or at least not to the degree that it was. And so people are left on their own to navigate out of that. And therefore, there are some challenges. Some people are able to do it and do it well. And some people may never have had the opportunity to just sit and reflect and to even do a self-reflection on where they were and where they are, and most importantly, how they go forward.
We talked a bit yesterday, and I was so impressed with the conversation that we had, because in about the past 6 weeks, I've had an aunt that passed away, an uncle, and a good friend.
Yeah.
And interestingly, at the funeral, I'm sitting beside my wife, and I'm feeling the tears coming. I said, "What is happening?"
Right.
What is happening?
Yes.
But after the funeral, I went home. I was with my wife. But the thought came to me: what about that person that lost that loved one? They're not going home to a husband or wife or children.
Exactly.
They're there by themselves. And so I can imagine that loss, that pain must be very hurtful. You wake up 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's just you.
Right.
So I can imagine that pain must be hurtful. Now, your workshop, is this going to be just a focus on the Bible and what the Bible says? Is that the angle you're coming from?
Actually, I'm glad you raised that. The workshop is aimed to be a creative, reflective, interactive approach to the topic of loss. As a matter of fact, the topic theme is celebrate life right here, right now, renewed. And so it's not a party, but it's a quiet celebration of a life that's no longer with us. And so the format of the exercise that day will basically be giving opportunities for people to connect with somebody else who might have had a similar loss.
Yeah.
If I lose my job, for instance, and you've lost your wife, there's a loss, but certainly that's not a parallel. How can I explain to you about my job and you're telling me about your wife? And so therefore the opportunity is for people who've had similar losses in one place at one time to A, to bond with others, B, to find some strategies for coping, C, to basically reflect on where they were, where they are, basically be able to share, because people are at different stages in the grief process. And there's no carte blanche, cookie cutter approach to grief. Like you said, for you, tears just came out of nowhere.
Yes.
But for somebody else, there may not be any tears at all.
And that was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Because you don't see the shedding of tears, while another person that you can't give them enough hankies to wipe off the tears,
Right.
does that mean that the one who's not shedding tears has a lack of compassion as compared to the one that's flowing with tears?
Oh, absolutely not. Our DNA is all different, isn't it? And so how we respond to life is different. When we respond to life is different, and therefore one shouldn't be judged because they've shed more tears, more compassionate, or Fewer tears, less
Yeah,
compassionate.
I'm so glad you said that, because I've heard individuals say, well, Mary or Sue or John, they didn't cry. They must not have loved that person. But tears, if I'm correct with what you're saying, tears or the lack of tears is not necessarily a reflection on the relationship.
Absolutely not. And I must say, I did a little research on this whole stages of grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who wrote a book on death and dying. And she talks about the denial stage, which is stage 1. People are shocked, like, this has really happened? You know, you might even have had time to prepare for it, or may not have had time to prepare for it. So that shock stage is what she calls the denial stage. And then for some people, progressing after that is anger. I was listening to the television just last evening. There's a gentleman who lost his son.
Yes, yes.
And he's angry.
Yes.
And he wanted the world to know he is angry.
So anger is okay?
Of course. It's an emotion.
Yes.
Anger, but sin not. It's
Yes,
okay.
be angry, but sin not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're not going to go out and take another life.
Right.
But your emotions, you're entitled to feel what you feel. And then there's also, people look at bargaining. And by that, I think the writer means that you're looking for anything to fix this pain. The pain is too great. I don't like what I'm feeling. I need to do something, take a trip, go, help for lunch with a friend, do something to help to medicate this pain. Yeah. And so the stages are different. Yeah.
So let me ask you, in that particular last stage that you mentioned, where someone is looking for a way of getting rid of those pain, it seems to me that can be a very difficult stage for someone. Someone may turn to alcohol, they may turn to drugs, they may turn to some form of inappropriate behavior to get rid of that pain.
That's possible.
Yeah.
That's very possible. And that speaks to the reason why people need support, because you want to encourage healthy ways of dealing with the loss as opposed to unhealthy ways, because they can slip into depression, which is something else she talks about. And depression, as we know, is not good, it's not healthy, doesn't allow us to be free, and we should be free and not being stuck, if you will, in emotions that don't allow us to move forward.
Now, as we go through the stages, is there a particular recipe that you could follow? This stage lasts 1 month. Oh, this one's supposed to last 3 months. This one 2 weeks.
No, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I've spoken with friends of mine who are professionals in the field, and they were saying, there's no cookie cutter approach to grief recovery. There isn't, and neither should there be. Because I think that one needs to be allowed, the Lord knows all about what you've been through. He's the beginning and the end, and so He can guide you through that process. And whether you're angry for a long time, you might be a help to somebody down the road who's angry and about to do something inappropriate. And so having gone through that whole process is helpful, I think, to be able to help somebody else down the road.
Okay. We are talking with Dr. Andrea Lightbourne-Webster on her upcoming workshop, and we will continue our conversation shortly. Welcome back, and we are speaking with Dr. Andrea Lightbourne-Webster. These ladies with these double names, it's kind of tricky. My wife uses that double name, and it's kind of tricky. Anyhow, we've been talking about loss. She will be having a workshop coming up, and she'll fill you in on the times and dates before the program is finished. But we're talking about loss, and we're going to continue our discussion on that. You were mentioning a few of the stages in grief recovery. Not that any of that will be your focus during the workshop, but let's just go back to denial for a little bit. When someone, in terms of denial, could that denial be, I really wasn't the person I should have been to my grandfather who passed away, or my grandmother, or spouse, or friend. But maybe that would be guilt. Is guilt one of the stages, do you know?
Well, remember, I'm not a practitioner in the field of it, but having said that, though, I believe that there's a myriad of emotions attached to loss. Yeah. And it depends on the relationship that the person has with the deceased. For instance, if they had a estranged relationship, very estranged relationship, not very communicative, then they may feel, gee, what if I had responded differently? What if I had been a more social person? Yes, yes. And all those kinds of thoughts bombard the mind. And so I think each situation is different, and I think many emotions cloud the mind. And as I say, I believe people are at different stages and different response levels to whatever's going on, depending on the situation.
Yeah. Now, with your workshop, and you mentioned a little bit about it before, but the practical part of the workshop, let's just talk about that just for a brief moment, some of the practical things that you will be doing.
Well, for some people, they don't like to stand in front of a large group and talk about personal issues, especially something as dear as that. So I've found through my educational experience that interactive activities work very, very well. And so the goal is to pair people up with similar losses, or even if they're not similar losses, depending on who comes that day, just have people make connections with somebody who they've connected with in the room. And then we are going to, and during that connecting time, the listener must listen. It's not a whole lot of interruption. Give them a chance to talk. And there's a series of questions that accompany the activity, and then you reverse the roles, and then we share out in terms of what did that experience mean, what did you learn, etc. Have a video clip from a professional who is speaking about the whole issue of grief. I have professionals in the field who are knowledgeable about grief responses, and a psychologist who knows all about the issues that people may not want to share out loud. And so there are qualified professionals on hand, spiritual leaders on hand, who some people might want prayer, haven't been to church forever.
Let's talk about that for a while, because I should mention that I believe your foundation has a strong spiritual background to it. Am I not correct with that?
Well, yes, because the genesis of this whole idea of the Lighthouse Ministry Foundation began after a time of spiritual reflection during January 2013. And it therefore has a religious component, if I could put it that way, but it's not a reincarnation of church. And I say that with the kindest respect. People are sometimes looking for other avenues they may not necessarily want to share in familiar circles. Here are people they may be meeting for the first time, and there's somewhat of a measure of comfort with people that you don't necessarily know versus people who know everything about you or know more about you or think they know more about you. And so therefore, that openness is there.
Yeah, so I could be a church goer or I could not be a church goer.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're not restricted in any way. As a matter of fact, I'm hoping that we have a diverse group of people who may be churched or unchurched. But certainly the opportunity, if they want the prayer, it's them. It's not pressed upon them at all. And sometimes people get to the point where, I've done everything. I've done everything. I've done the counseling, I've done the trips, I've done reflection. I need a little bit more. And so it's a road of self-discovery in terms of what they need as opposed to me telling them what they need. And so I see myself as a facilitator in the whole exercise, making sure that the activities go, in a direction that keeps to our theme. Time is well spent, and people leave there renewed. That's the whole purpose.
I like what you said about self-discovery. Now, in this one-to-one, where individuals will be sharing, if they so choose, in a one-to-one relationship, it seems like a couple of things could happen. Out of that, a relationship could take place in terms of they share the same type of hurt. Or it could be that they don't share the same type of hurt.
Exactly.
So this is very helpful as they listen to one another.
Right.
Do you think sometimes the loss prevents people from wanting to share, that maybe they just want to be by themselves and grieve by themselves and not really share anything?
Absolutely. I think anyone who decides to come, first of all, must have a reason for coming. And so that's why it's open. You know, it's not restricted to any age or group or circumstance or gun violence or anything like that. So if they may be at a point where they are open and wanting to share more, and that's the opportunity that they have on one-on-one to be able to be a bit more reflective on their own. And again, they may not want to say anything.
Anything at all. Right.
They may not want to say anything at all. There's no obligation. But sometimes I find, and perhaps you found this too, we think that our circumstance is the worst.
Yes.
It can't get any worse.
That's true.
Until you hear the story of somebody else.
Yeah.
And then you say, wow, they went through that? You know what? I can make it. I can really make it because my situation is nowhere near whatever. I don't believe that we get more than we can bear anyway. Yeah. And so I think that we never know what incentive and encouragement it could be for someone else who may be feeling overwhelmed.
We just have a few minutes left, but just back to this issue with prayer. I think they've done studies, and not necessarily religious people, they've done studies in hospitals where they've found that those individuals who pray and those individuals who pray for individuals who are in the hospital, that somehow prayer works and people recover. Have you had any personal experience or known someone where prayer works on their behalf?
You mean in general?
Yes, in general.
Oh my goodness, yes. Oh my goodness, yes. Prayer is the answer to everything, because of course I believe Jesus is the answer, you know, and therefore when we commune with him as a mediator to God the Father, he gives all the answers that we need. And the thing about it is, it usually comes in a package that you least expect. And that validates the whole prayer exercise.
Explain that for me. That's interesting, isn't it?
Well, sometimes we would pray for something, and we have an expectation that it will be answered.
Yes.
But the methodology of the answer may completely blow our minds because I wasn't, or you may not be expecting the answer that way.
Yes, okay.
And so therefore, you know, it had to be a God to do this.
Yeah, I follow you.
Yeah.
Dr. Andrea Lightbourne, we just have a couple of minutes. Could you share with us when this workshop is going to be, where it's going to be, and is there a cost?
Yes, I'm funding this myself. This is my sacrificial event. All of it is, actually. Yeah. But basically, it's at Salvation Army, across from Delwood School, because I had someone come the last time thinking it was at the hostel there, but it's at the Salvation Army Youth Hall, right on the corner on North Street. Yeah. And it's going to be on June the 21st, which is a Saturday. It begins at 9, ends at 3. Okay. Lunch is provided for them, and it's a cost of $30. And so they're getting a lot from 9 to 3 with professionals and food and fellowship and training about how to cope with life. And the tickets are available at the Music Box in Hamilton, Reed Street.
Very good. We have been talking with Dr. Andrea Lightbourne, the founder and director of the Lighthouse Ministry, and she has an upcoming workshop, June the 21st.
That's correct.
The focus will be on loss. Everyone is invited. You could be a churchgoer, not a churchgoer, somebody who doesn't want to talk, somebody who wants to share. Right. But if you have suffered a loss and want to recover from that, then you need to be at this workshop. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
You've been watching Issues, and we will see you next time.